everybody, Dr. Nelson here. This is a video lesson about ratios and rates involving fractions. Alright, so to prepare you for this lesson, let's do a quick review about just what is a ratio. Alright, so this is a term that you've probably heard before, but remember, a ratio shows the relative size of two or more values, right? Remember, there's different ways of writing ratios. Let's say if we have values A and B, right? Well, we can use the word 2. So we could say A to B. We could use the colon symbol, right? So A colon symbol B. And we also can write it using a fraction where it's A over B. So all three of these mean the same thing when representing ratios. All right, now another term to know is the term rate, okay? Rate is a type of ratio that basically compares two or more quantities. So a simple example of this would be, for every 3 cats, there's 2 dogs. And the quantities are highlighted in red, where it's cats and dogs. So here's a problem involving rate. So it says Chris is riding his bike. He traveled 4 miles in 15 minutes. What is his rate of speed? All right, so the question is really, how fast is Chris riding his bike? So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write the ratio that we know. So we know that he travels 4 miles in 15 minutes. All right, so Chris is moving pretty quick. All right, so the question is, what's his rate of speed? So the way we determine that is we want to know how many miles Chris will be going in an hour, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write another ratio over here, okay? And an hour is 60 minutes, right? So I'm going to write 60 minutes here. And now notice, to go from 15 to 60, we would have to multiply 15 times 4, right? So what you're allowed to do with ratios is what I do here, I'm allowed to do up here. So when I do 4 times 4, I get 16 miles. All right, so 16 miles over 60 minutes is the same ratio as 4 miles over 15 minutes. But this right here would be his rate of speed. So he's going basically 16 miles an hour. All right, so as part of this unit of study, what you have to do is you have to figure out the rate of speed of certain cars, or even like say trains, okay? So here we have 3 different cars. We have car A, car B, and car C, okay? And we know that car A traveled in 2 hours, 80 miles. Car B traveled in 3 hours, 90 miles. And car C traveled in a half hour, 35 miles, okay? So we want to know which car is traveling the fastest, okay? So the way you figure out the rate of speed is you take the distance traveled and you divide it by the time traveled. So I'm going to write this over here, and this is one thing you need to remember for this lesson. So what you do is you do the distance and you divide it by the time. All right, so with that said, let's figure out car A. So for car A, we know the distance is 80. And we're going to divide it by the time, which is 2. So 80 divided by 2 would give us 40. So we know that the rate of car A is 40 miles per hour. All right, so the same thing for car B. Okay, car B, again, we're going to do the miles, 90, divided by the time. So this is going to be 30. So for car B, it's going to be 30 miles an hour. All right, now car C is a little more complicated, but not really. It's really the same thing, but this time we have a fraction, right? So again, I'm going to go with, again, the distance, 35, and I'm going to divide it by a half, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write it as 35 over 1, and I'm going to divide it by a half. Now, remember, the rule when dividing fractions is you multiply by the reciprocal, right? So this is really going to be 35 over 1 times, now the reciprocal of 1/2 is 2 over 1. And now when I multiply 35 times 2, I get 70. And then 1 times 1 is 1. So car C was traveling at 70 miles per hour. There it is. So the answer to the question, which car is traveling the fastest or faster, right? Fastest. It should be car C. All right, let's do one more rate of speed problem. This one's going to be a little more complex, but really it's the same math, okay? So here's a scenario. This problem involves e-bikes. I'm sure you've probably seen e-bikes around town or in the city. But it says Jonah traveled 2.5 miles in 2/5 of an hour, and Zoe traveled 1 3/4 miles in 3/10 of an hour. Who is traveling at a greater rate of speed? All right. So again, remember, to get the rate of speed, it's always the distance. All right, the distance divided by the time. All right. So for Jonah, the distance is 2.5. So we're going to do 2.5 is 2.5. And we need to divide that by 2/5. So that's going to be Jonah. And then for Zoe, we need to do 1.75, which is 1 3/4. And we need to divide that by 3/10. All right. So first, Jonah. So 2.5 can be changed to an improper fraction. So that's going to be 5/2. And then I'm going to divide that now by 2/5. Now, just a quick reminder, remember, the way you divide fractions is you multiply by the reciprocal, right? So it's going to be 5/2 times, well, the reciprocal of 2/5 is 5/2. And now when we multiply fractions, we multiply the numerators. So 5 times 5 is 25. 2 times 2 is 4. And now I'm going to make that a mixed number again. So I know 4 goes into 25 6 times with 1 left over. So it'll be 6 1/4 miles per hour. So that's the rate for Jonah. Now let's go with Zoe. So for Zoe, again, we have a mixed number. So I'm going to make this improper. So that's going to be 7/4 divided by 3/10. And now again, to divide fractions, you multiply by the reciprocal, right? So it's going to be 7/4 times 10/3. And that's a 4 right there. All right. So remember, when you have a chance to cross reduce, you always should. So I know that 10 and 4 has a common factor of 2. So I can divide both 10 and 4 by 2. So I'm going to make this 10 divided by 2 is 5. And 4 divided by 2 is 2, right? So now 7 times 5 gives us 35. And 2 times 3 gives us 6. And lastly, I'm going to make this back into a mixed number. I know that 6 goes into 35 5 times with 5 left over. So it'll be 5 5/6 miles per hour. So the answer to the question is, who's traveling at a greater rate of speed? It would definitely be Jonah. So there's 2 things I really need you to remember about this unit, about this lesson, okay? To get the rate, you take the distance and you divide it by the time, all right? And then if your problem involves fractions, all right, when you divide fractions, you multiply it by the reciprocal. All right, good luck.